What life was really like in 1880s America, the rise of a dream. Let's turn back time together and explore a special period in American history, the 1880s. Many often refer to this decade as a golden age, a name that evokes sparkle, wealth, and tremendous development. But was everything truly as dazzling as the thin layer of gold on the surface? Or were there hidden stories, challenges, and conflicts less talked about beneath that glamorous facade? Join us to explore, and don't forget to stay until the end of the video to draw valuable historical lessons from the 1880s together. The Gilded Age, America's transformation. The 1880s were not just a point in time, but a period of strong global economic growth, especially in Europe and America. This was an indispensable part of the Gilded Age in the United States, lasting from 1874 to 1907. This name, coined by writer Mark Twain, implies that while the outside seemed glamorous, the inside was filled with countless social and political problems. At the same time, it was the Victorian era in England and the Belle Époque in France. All depicted a picture of booming development, remarkable progress, and a strong belief in the future. Society was undergoing a fundamental shift, from agriculture to industry, from rural areas to cities, and from outdated technology to life-changing inventions. This decade also marked the peak of the Second Industrial Revolution. While the first focused on steam and textiles, this wave was defined by revolutionary breakthroughs in science and technology, especially the widespread adoption of electricity. Just think, before 1880, light primarily came from candles or kerosene lamps, weak and fire-prone sources. But now, electricity began to light up streets and homes, bringing about a spectacular lighting revolution. Electricity didn't stop at lighting, it also powered factories, engines, and public transportation, opening a completely new era of production and movement. This transformed industry, making factories operate more efficiently, faster, and at lower costs, while expanding production on an unprecedented scale. In 1880, the United States had 38 states and about 50 million people. Notably, the majority of the population still lived and worked in rural areas. Rural life, though peaceful, was often isolated and lacked amenities. However, this picture was rapidly changing. A large wave of immigration from Europe was pouring into the U.S., creating a strong population shift from rural areas to vibrant cities. These immigrants, hopeful for a better life, flocked to major cities, seeking work in burgeoning factories and enterprises. This shift was not just geographical, it was also a change in the country's lifestyle, culture, and social structure. The transportation sector also witnessed significant transformation. Travel was no longer limited to walking or horseback riding, but was revolutionized by steam locomotives, streetcars, and even gasoline-powered automobiles. Steam locomotives connected distant regions, transporting goods and people faster than ever before. Streetcars began appearing in major cities, making it easier for residents to move within booming urban areas. And while still in their infancy, the advent of gasoline-powered automobiles signaled a completely new future for personal vehicles. These inventions were not just utilities, they were symbols of continuous progress, reshaping how people worked, lived, and interacted with the world. They shortened distances, expanded markets, and fostered cultural exchange, creating a more dynamic and connected society. From remote rural areas to bustling city centers, the lives of Americans changed radically, ushering in an era full of promise but also challenges. These changes were not just on a macro level but also permeated every family and individual. Electricity brought not only light but also greater convenience and safety. Industrial machinery created more diverse products, improving the quality of life for a segment of the population. Transportation development made travel easier, opening up opportunities for work and living in more distant places. However, alongside the glamour, the 1880s also began to reveal their darker sides. Rapid growth came with immense pressure on urban infrastructure and the living and working conditions of laborers, especially immigrants. Although it was a golden age of growth and progress, it was also rife with inequality, social conflict, and intractable problems. The stark contrast between the extreme wealth of a few and the hardship of the working class was at the core of the thin layer of gold that Mark Twain referred to. In your opinion, which aspect of this period left the strongest impression on you, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Economy and industry, the giant machine speeds up. Industrial development in the 1880s was not just about increasing production. It was a profound force transforming American society. The pace of industrialization was so rapid that it completely changed how society was organized, from family structures and community relations to political systems and cultural values. Previously, a farming family often lived self-sufficiently, producing almost everything they needed. But with the advent of large factories, people flocked to cities for work, relying on wages to buy goods. This broke traditional social patterns and created many new challenges. The industrial boom created a new social structure with three main developing classes. First were the wealthy industrialists. They were tycoons who owned massive business empires, controlled key industries, and accumulated immense wealth. Names like John D. Rockefeller in oil refining, who built the nearly monopolistic Standard Oil empire, and Andrew Carnegie in steel production, who applied advanced techniques to create a colossal steel empire, supplying materials for urban and railway development, are essential to mention. These individuals were often called captains of industry or robber barons, depending on the perspective, but their immense influence on the American economy is undeniable. They were pioneers and founders, but also controversial in how they amassed wealth and treated their workers. Next was the prosperous middle class. This group included professionals, managers, and small business owners who benefited from economic growth and had more stable lives. This class began to grow significantly as the economy needed more industrial support services, from accountants, lawyers, and engineers to retail store owners. They were the backbone of social stability, creating a buffer between extreme wealth and the struggling working class. They began to afford new industrial products, own better homes, and enjoy urban amenities, thereby further boosting the consumer economy. Finally, there was the blue-collar working class. These were the people who worked directly in factories, mines, and construction sites, forming the backbone of the nation's development. They faced harsh working conditions, low wages, and long hours. Their lives were often concentrated in crowded areas around factories, with poor sanitation and cramped living spaces. The grandeur of industrialization was built on the sweat and labor of millions of these workers, who were often exploited and lacked legal protection. In addition to traditional industries, many entirely new industries emerged, reshaping the national economy. For example, the boom in oil refining, which created energy for machinery and lighting, or the development of steel production, providing construction materials for infrastructure. And especially the advent of electricity pioneered by Thomas Edison opened up an entirely new industry, changing every aspect of life from production to daily living. Before that, coal and steam were the main energy sources, but electricity was more efficient, cleaner, and more flexible, allowing factories to be located anywhere with access to the power grid. The railroad system expanded incredibly, reaching even the most remote parts of the country, bringing them into the national market economy. This was not just a means of transport, but also the artery of the new economy. This meant agricultural products from the West could reach East Coast cities, coal from Pennsylvania could go to factories in Illinois, and manufactured goods could reach consumers everywhere. Railroads unified the national market, allowing businesses to operate on a larger scale and creating a continuous flow of goods and services. The development of railroads also led to an important standardization. By 1890, the United States had been divided into 4 separate time zones. This standardization was necessary to simplify train schedules and nationwide business operations. The shift in labor structure also clearly reflected the pace of industrialization and urbanization. In 1880, nearly half of American workers were still farmers. Only under 15% worked in manufacturing. This figure shows an economy still heavily reliant on agriculture. But just 40 years later, by 1920, the number of agricultural and industrial workers was almost equal, demonstrating the superior pace of urbanization and industrialization. This illustrates a fundamental change in the lifestyle and livelihoods of Americans, as millions left farms to seek opportunities in urban factories. The development of commercial electricity in the late 19th century was another key factor, allowing industries to fully utilize the abundant labor supply in major cities. Electricity provided a flexible and efficient power source, enabling factories to operate continuously, regardless of the time of day or weather conditions. This created more jobs in urban centers, attracting a large number of laborers from rural areas and other countries. This decade witnessed the birth and growth of modern business forms, such as giant corporations, franchising, and established brands. Corporations like Standard Oil and U.S. Steel concentrated economic power in the hands of a few, creating unprecedented large-scale business models. Brands began to emerge, building trust and product recognition in an increasingly competitive market. All of this laid the foundation for the modern capitalist economic system we know today. An undeniable symbol of this era was the emergence of the skyscraper. With the development of steel technology and safe elevators, architects could build taller buildings than ever before. The Home Insurance Building in Chicago, opened in 1885, is considered the first skyscraper in history. This 10-story building, with its load-bearing steel frame, was not only an engineering marvel but also a symbol of America's ambition, continuous development, and desire to reach new heights. They completely changed the urban landscape, creating unprecedented population density and economic activity. This economic and industrial development cannot be separated from the role of immigrants. They were an abundant labor source willing to do arduous jobs for low wages, thereby accelerating the growth rate of industries. Without them, this giant machine might not have sped up so quickly. Their dedication and effort were an indispensable part of the story of America's prosperity during this period. Migration and urbanization, hope and harsh reality. At New York Harbor, a majestic symbol stands tall, the Statue of Liberty. This statue is not just an architectural marvel, but also a radiant symbol of hope, a promise of a better life in a land where freedom and justice prevail. For millions of immigrants from around the world, from impoverished Europe to war-torn or religiously oppressed lands, the statue was a guiding light, a gateway to a brighter future. They left their homeland seeking opportunities, escaping poverty, war, or oppression, with a strong belief in the American dream, that anyone with hard work and determination could achieve success. However, a better life did not come immediately. Harsh realities often greeted newcomers. Millions of immigrants often flocked to crowded areas like Lower Manhattan, where they had to live in cramped tenements with poor sanitation and extremely limited living space. Tenement apartments sprang up densely, each just a few square meters, but housing an entire large family. Clean water was scarce, drainage systems were poor, and diseases spread quickly in this deprived environment. The American dream often began with sleepless nights on cold floors and grueling days working in dirty factories. The scale of migration during this period was unprecedented in U.S. history. From 1880 to 1920, the number of immigrants increased from nearly 7 million to almost 14 million people. This was a continuous flow of people with hopes and desires to change their lives. By 1920, more than one-third of the 105 million Americans belonged to the immigrant community, showing the profound impact of this wave on America's population structure and society. These people brought not only labor but also their cultures, languages, and traditions, creating a diverse and rich society. Immigrants and their children played an extremely important role in America's industrial development. They were the main labor force, providing strength for booming factories, mines, and construction projects. By 1920, they accounted for more than half of all manufacturing workers. They did jobs that native-born workers often refused because they were too arduous, dangerous, or low-paying. Without this massive and willing workforce, the pace of American industrialization might have slowed considerably. However, a sad truth is that these immigrants often had to accept lower wages and worse working conditions than native-born workers. They were more vulnerable to exploitation due to language barriers, lack of legal knowledge, and fear of deportation. They often worked in dark, dangerous factories with long hours, no benefits, and no protection. Parallel to the wave of migration was the urbanization boom. 1880 was the first decade in U.S. history, excluding the Civil War decade, where urban population growth exceeded rural population growth. Cities exploded in size and population, becoming economic, cultural, and social centers. Cities like New York, Chicago, Boston, and Philadelphia saw phenomenal population increases, leading to rapid development of infrastructure, housing, and public services. However, too rapid growth also posed major challenges in urban management, sanitation, transportation, and security. Population overload led to traffic congestion, lack of clean water, overwhelmed drainage systems, and increased crime. Cities became giant melting pots where dreams and harsh realities coexisted. Migration and urbanization were not just economic phenomena, but also complex social phenomena. They reshaped American cultural identity, with a blend of traditions, languages, and cuisines from all over the world. Immigrant communities formed, creating distinct neighborhoods with unique cultural identities. However, this diversity also came with racial, social, and economic tensions. Nativists sometimes viewed immigrants with suspicion and prejudice, fearing they would take jobs or dilute American culture. Urban life brought many opportunities, but also unprecedented challenges. For many, especially women and children, city life was a big change from rural life. Social activists and charitable organizations began to emerge to address issues like poverty, homelessness, and disease in slums. Settlement houses like Jane Addams' Hull House in Chicago provided support and education to immigrants, helping them integrate into American society. From the industrial boom to the wave of migration, how did the 1880s shape modern America? What do you think is the greatest legacy this era left behind? Politics. Turmoil at the pinnacle of power. The 1880s were a particularly tumultuous period in American politics, witnessing continuous changes in the presidency. In just one decade, the United States had 5 different presidents, the most since the 1840s. They were Rutherford B. Hayes, James A. Garfield, Chester A. Arthur, Grover Cleveland, and Benjamin Harrison. This constant change reflected a politically volatile period, with fierce competition between the two major parties, Democrats and Republicans, and the emergence of new social and economic issues. Elections were often very close, and no one could maintain power for long, indicating division and instability among the populace. One of the most shocking events of the decade was the assassination of President James Garfield on September 19, 1881. He was shot by Charles Guiteau, a disgruntled lawyer who was upset about not being appointed to a diplomatic position. This incident was not just a personal tragedy, but also exposed the weaknesses of the spoils system in politics. This system, also known as patronage, involved granting government positions to political supporters rather than based on merit. Guiteau believed he was entitled to a position after supporting Garfield's campaign, and frustration drove him to extreme action. The assassination sparked a wave of public outrage and strongly pushed for calls for government reform. After President Arthur took office, he recognized the need for reform and strongly supported the Pendleton Act, passed in 1883. This act mandated that civil service appointments be made by the newly established civil service system based on merit and examinations, rather than by the ruling political party. This was an important step in building a more professional and efficient government apparatus, reducing corruption and political favoritism. The Pendleton Act laid the foundation for the modern U.S. civil service system, though it took many decades to truly eliminate the spoils system completely. However, the 1880s also saw controversial and discriminatory policies. Most notably was the Chinese Exclusion Act, signed into law by President Chester A. Arthur on May 3, 1882. This act prohibited the immigration of Chinese people into the U.S. for 10 years. This was the first federal law in the United States to ban a specific racial group from entering, reflecting the deep xenophobia and racism in American society at the time, especially in the West where many Chinese worked in the railroad industry. This act had severe consequences for the Chinese community in the U.S. and remains a stain on the nation's human rights history. On the international stage, a notable historical event occurred on May 13, 1888, when Brazil officially abolished slavery. With this event, Brazil became the last country in the Western Hemisphere to do so, marking the end of a dark era in human history. This was an important milestone in the global struggle for freedom and equality, showing a gradual shift in human rights awareness worldwide. In the United States, westward expansion continued, bringing both opportunities and tragic conflicts. In 1889, President Harrison declared Native American lands in Oklahoma open to white settlement, leading to the famous Oklahoma Land Rush. Tens of thousands of people flocked to Oklahoma in a race for land, seizing traditional territories of Native American tribes, pushing them into smaller and poorer reservations. During the same period, the last resistance of Native Americans to white expansion was suppressed. Two prominent Native American figures faced tragic fates. Sitting Bull of the Lakota Sioux tribe, who led Native American forces to victory at the Battle of Little Bighorn, eventually surrendered in 1881. He was shot and killed in 1890 during an arrest attempt. Geronimo of the Apache tribe, a fierce warrior who led revolts against the U.S. and Mexican armies for many years, was finally captured in 1886. These events marked the end of decades of frontier warfare and a sad chapter in Native American history, as their culture, land, and traditional way of life were mercilessly destroyed. Along with the disappearance of buffalo from the western plains, the open range was filled with Texas longhorn cattle. Buffalo, the main livelihood for many Native American tribes, were hunted nearly to extinction, causing an ecological and cultural disaster. However, by the late 1880s, more and more grasslands were converted into farmland, and ranchers began fencing off larger ranches. This heralded the end of the legendary Wild West, with the free life of cowboys and unlimited adventures. American society, challenges, and voices rising up. The 1880s were not just a period of economic growth, but also a time of great violence and political upheaval. Tensions between authorities and outlaws in the West reached their peak, leading to one of the most famous gunfights in American history. The gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, in 1881. The confrontation between the Earp brothers and the Clanton family lasted only 30 seconds but became legendary, reflecting the chaos and lack of law in the western frontier. Gunfights, bank robberies, and other illegal acts were part of daily reality in many parts of the Wild West, where law was not yet firmly established. In the same year, the notorious outlaw Jesse James was also shot and killed by Bob Ford in 1882. Jesse James, a Confederate veteran and infamous robber, became a symbol of defiance for many common people, but also a terror for banks and railroads. His death marked the end of an era of banditry and lawlessness, signaling that order and rules were gradually being established in the West. However, larger conflicts stemmed from deeper social issues, especially in the labor sector. The industrial boom created a massive working class, but neglected their basic rights and working conditions. They faced long working hours, often 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, low wages, dangerous working environments with unprotected machinery, and no health insurance or pensions. Workplace accidents were frequent, and injured workers received no compensation. One of the most tragic and influential events was the Haymarket Affair. On May 4, 1886, Haymarket Square in Chicago became the scene of a tragic and shocking bombing during a large workers' protest demanding an 8-hour workday. A bomb exploded, killing several police officers and civilians. Although the perpetrators were never clearly identified, this event led to the arrest and conviction of many labor activists and is considered the origin of modern International Workers' Day protests. The incident sparked a wave of backlash against labor movements and anarchism, but at the same time increased awareness of the need for labor reform. In this context, labor unions began to form and grow stronger to fight for workers' basic rights, better wages, reasonable working hours, and safer working conditions. They realized that individual strength was not enough, and only solidarity could create change. In 1886, one of the most influential labor unions, the American Federation of Labor, AFL, was founded by Samuel Gompers. The AFL, under Gompers' leadership, focused on practical goals such as wages, working hours, and working conditions, steering clear of broader political objectives, which helped them achieve significant successes for their members. Not only workers, but many farmers also faced increasing difficulties in the 1880s. They were pressured by banks, railroad companies charging high transportation fees, and falling agricultural prices due to overproduction. To cope, farmers began to organize into groups like the Granges and Farmers' Alliances. These organizations provided social, educational, and economic support to farmers and lobbied for policies favorable to them. Some even attempted to form a new political party, the People's Party, Populists, with a strong platform calling for political and economic reforms to protect the interests of farmers and the working class. Although they did not gain supreme power, the populist movement had a great influence on later American politics. In addition to human-made social conflicts, the 1880s also witnessed a terrible natural disaster. The collapse of the South Fork Dam after heavy rains caused a devastating flood in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, in May 1889, killing over 2,000 people. This was one of the worst civil disasters in U.S. history. Amidst the destruction and grief, the image of Nurse Clara Barton emerged as a symbol of compassion. As the founder of the American Red Cross, she provided significant relief, organized medical teams, and distributed necessities to the victims. Her actions and those of her organization highlighted the importance of humanity and disaster preparedness in a developing society. The challenges and social conflicts in the 1880s present a complex picture of America. On one hand, the country was experiencing unprecedented economic development. On the other hand, this development came at the cost of inequality, oppression, and violence. The unyielding voices of workers, farmers, and the vulnerable forced societies to re-examine its values and fight for justice. Science and technology, ushering in a new era. The 1880s truly were a golden decade of innovation, laying the foundation for the modern world we live in. The explosion of scientific and technological inventions during this period was unprecedented, with profound impacts on every aspect of life. Electricity, we must certainly mention Thomas Edison, dubbed the Wizard of Menlo Park. In December 1880, he founded the Edison Electric Light Company, pioneering the electric industry. But the pinnacle of his career in this decade was the opening of the Pearl Street Station in New York in September 1882. This first central power plant in the United States began operation, supplying electricity to a large area of Lower Manhattan, lighting homes, offices, and streets, opening a new era of light and energy. This was a crucial turning point from single light bulbs to a large-scale power distribution system, signaling the birth of a colossal industry. Edison also made other contributions, such as inventing the phonograph in 1877, allowing sound recording and playback. Transportation. The field of transportation also saw incredible leaps. In 1885, Carl Benz introduced the Benz-Patent motor wagon, considered the world's first automobile. This invention paved the way for the development of the automotive industry, changing how people moved and profoundly impacting urban planning. In 1883, the famous long-distance passenger train Orient Express began running between Paris and Constantinople, now Istanbul. This was not just a railway line, but also a symbol of luxury, connecting cultures and expanding travel frontiers. Furthermore, streetcars and trains were first powered by electricity. This made public transportation more efficient, faster, and cleaner, boosting the development of major cities. And a simpler but very popular mode of transport was the bicycle. The new low-wheeled bicycle, also known as the safety bike, became popular. With its design of two equally sized wheels and a chain drive system, it made cycling much easier and safer than previous high-wheeled bicycles, opening up a new form of recreation and commuting for everyone. Communication. The 1880s also witnessed foundational inventions for the later communication revolution. In 1880, Oliver Heaviside patented the coaxial cable, an efficient electrical signal transmission technology that paved the way for long-distance phone calls, television, and the internet. In 1884, Paul Nipkow invented the Nipkow disc, an image scanning device which was the basis for the first electromechanical television system. In 1888, German physicist Heinrich Hertz successfully transmitted and received radio waves. This was a groundbreaking discovery, proving the existence of electromagnetic waves and opening the door to wireless communication. And in 1889, Alman Brown Stroger patented the step-by-step switch. This invention revolutionized the telephone system, enabling automatic telephone exchanges, making phone communication much faster and more convenient. Other inventions in this field include the payphone in 1889, the ballpoint pen in 1888, and the telautograph precursor to the fax machine in 1888, photography and cinema. These two fields also made great strides. George Eastman introduced the Kodak #1 camera, a great success in 1888 with the slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest." It made photography more accessible to the public. Eastman also invented flexible photographic film in 1885, replacing bulky glass plates. In 1889, Edison himself used Eastman's new celluloid film to project a series of images onto a screen. This is considered the historical moment when he invented motion pictures, opening up an entirely new art form and entertainment. In your opinion, which invention or historical event from the 1880s had the greatest impact on life today? Comment below. Culture and lifestyle, the colors of an era. The 1880s were not only a period of industrial innovation, but also a golden age of literature and art, where classic works were born and new cultural trends shaped social life. Literature and art. This was a golden age for literature. Mark Twain, one of America's greatest writers, published his masterpiece Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in 1884. This novel was not just an adventure story, but also a profound social critique of race, freedom, and morality. In Italy, Carlo Collodi released The Adventures of Pinocchio in 1883, a classic fairy tale about a wooden boy dreaming of becoming real. And in detective fiction, Arthur Conan Doyle published his first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, in 1887, introducing one of the most famous detectives of all time. In music, African-American music and the ragtime genre began to gain popularity with their syncopated rhythms and lively melodies. Ragtime was an important precursor to jazz. In painting, we witnessed the emergence of brilliant talents. Vincent van Gogh painted immortal works such as Irises in 1889 and The Starry Night in 1889. These paintings are not only masterpieces of the post-impressionist school, but also symbols of intense creativity and emotion. And in Paris, Moulin Rouge, one of the most famous cabarets, opened in 1889. It became a symbol of vibrant Parisian nightlife and bohemian culture. Architecture. The 1880s were also an incredible period for architecture. The Brooklyn Bridge, a grand engineering feat connecting Brooklyn and Manhattan, New York, was completed on May 24, 1883. With the installation of 70 arc lamps, it was not just a functional bridge, but also a symbol of innovation and vision. In France, another great architectural symbol was inaugurated, the Eiffel Tower. Opened on March 31, 1889, the Eiffel Tower was not only the gateway to the World's Fair, but also became the tallest structure in the world at the time. It stands as a testament to engineering prowess and daring design. Sports. The field of sports also saw important developments. In 1882, Kano Jigoro created judo. This was not just a martial art, but also a philosophy emphasizing flexibility and technique. Baseball, America's favorite sport, underwent significant changes. In 1884, pitchers were first allowed to throw overhand instead of just underhand. This completely changed the tactics and gameplay of the sport. American football at the time was still considered a brutal game due to its violent nature. However, Walter Camp introduced the basic rules of modern football, laying the foundation for the sport's development. Golf also began to be played in the U.S. with the founding of the Foxburg Golf Club in 1887. John L. Sullivan, the athlete of the decade, defeated Jake Kilrain in 1889 to win the bare-knuckle boxing championship. This was the last major fight where contestants did not wear padded gloves. Fashion. Fashion in the 1880s was characterized by a more is more philosophy. Stylish women wore outfits with multiple layers of fabric, covering them from head to toe. In particular, they used tightly laced corsets to create a slender waist and a bustle, a type of padded frame at the back, to create an impressive hourglass shape. This style was influenced by princess dresses and the extensive use of decorative details like ribbons, ruffles, bows, and lace. Although this trend was criticized for its restrictiveness, it remained very popular. Bodices and day dresses often had high, narrow shoulders and extremely tight sleeves. Necklines were high and close-fitting. Skirts often had an overskirt that was draped or pleated to reveal the underskirt. Food and drink. One of the most important inventions in the food and beverage industry of this decade was Coca-Cola. Invented by pharmacist John Pemberton in May 1886, initially as a tonic, it quickly became a globally popular soft drink. Education and healthcare. Despite much progress, the education and healthcare systems were still in their early stages. Most schools had only 1 or 2 rooms and 1 or 2 teachers teaching all grade levels. Education was still very basic and not widely accessible. In medicine, doctors were often not well trained or highly paid. Patent medicines, often mixed with alcohol or narcotics, were widely sold and unregulated, sometimes doing more harm than good. Thank you for joining us on this journey exploring the 1880s with Back to Yesterday. If you found this video helpful and interesting, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on exciting future content, and share with fellow history lovers. See you on the next historical adventure.